Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Bloomington received a month's worth of rain last weekend, flooding businesses and displacing a number of residents.
A lot of us are asking why this happened. And we went through a big dig years ago to prevent this from happening. It shouldn't have happened again.
Ahead, we look at the impact on the community and what the city is doing to combat future flooding. Plexes were recently approved in Bloomington neighborhoods zoned for single-family housing. However, some residents felt left out of the process.
We're currently working on is getting better representation of tenants and renters.
8 students are suing IU over its vaccine mandate for this fall, but the university remains confident in the legality of the requirement. These stories, plus the latest news headlines from around the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Hello and welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Perry Metz, in for the vacationing Joe Wren. Torrential rain last Friday night flooded areas of downtown Bloomington and portions along Clear Creek and claimed 1 life. But while the city received near record rainfall, there are questions about why the city's infrastructure couldn't handle it. It was the second major flooding downtown since the Big Dig project in 2000 that was supposed to alleviate the issue. And it left residents and businesses scrambling to recover in its aftermath. We have team coverage of the storm starting tonight with Adam Pinsker.
What started as a typical Friday evening at Nick's ended with rising floodwaters on Kirkwood Avenue spilling into the popular Bloomington restaurant and bar. Manager Zion Ballard suddenly went from serving customers to ushering them to higher ground.
We just sent everybody upstairs. People were trying to watch it and everything, but we were please, stay upstairs, stay out of the water.
Once the waters receded last Saturday, Nick's was able to open for business at 3 p.m. But around the corner at Bloomington Bagel, the storm prevented them from opening at all on Saturday.
We're lucky we didn't lose our bagel dough to develop its best flavor. It has to sit in a walk-in for 2 to 3 days, and we are fortunate that we didn't lose our dough as well.
It isn't just downtown Bloomington. Other areas felt the storm's fury, including May's greenhouse.
The cold frames that you see behind us were completely full of newly potted plants, and so they're completely gone.
Co-owner Nate Pennington says hundreds of summer plants that were nearly ready for sale were also destroyed during the storm. Pennington says this storm was worse than the one that flooded his greenhouses in February 2019.
It was 3 foot higher than it had ever been before, which was about right even with the top of tables. But then this time it was 6 foot higher. So everything on tables floated away.
Monroe County commissioners are encouraging individuals and businesses to report damage to their property online at in211.org. Estimates must reach a certain number in order to be eligible for federal loans.
We have to have 25 different businesses that have at least 40% of the assessed value damaged.
Indiana's Department of Homeland Security is also doing damage assessment in counties hardest hit by the storms. Bloomington Bagel owner Sue Aquila says the timing of this weather event couldn't be worse, with her business recently reopening after being shut down by the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're also hoping that the city, the state, and the federal government declare this a disaster relief area, because a lot of these businesses, after 15 months of the pandemic, are at risk of permanently closing.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
Monroe County's disaster declaration for the storm remains in effect until Wednesday. The flood not only affected downtown Bloomington, but also the city's south side. Some residents lost everything. Mitch Legan reports.
Personal belongings litter yards outside homes on Pinewood Drive as residents pick up the pieces of last week's devastating flood.
Stuff was already floating and in the water, so as soon as I opened the door, it just started pouring out.
Christina Robinson rents a duplex right next to Clear Creek. She's lived there with her daughter for the last 5 years and has seen the creek flood before, but nothing to the degree of what happened last weekend.
There's, trash cans, city trash cans, logs, all sorts of stuff flying by us, so it was really dangerous.
Around midnight last Friday, heavy rains caused Clear Creek to overflow, and water began rushing up the street. Before long, the water was waist high, houses were flooded, and residents needed to be rescued.
We were just like, if this truck don't come soon, we're gone. But those people came and helped us out big time, and I mean, they saved our lives.
When they returned, they found their lives upended, their belongings trashed, and homes completely flooded.
The water was coming in the front door first, then it started coming in the back door later.
Now, many need a new place to live.
I just have to keep the little bit that I can keep, find a new place to live, hopefully soon. Just sometimes a challenge in Bloomington being a college town, but hopefully find something decent and just rebuild from there.
The flood has impacted 45 homes in Monroe County, according to the American Red Cross. The Red Cross set up a temporary shelter at Bloomington North High School and was traveling to affected areas over the week to provide assistance.
I'm getting the rest of yours.
Thank you so much.
For what you didn't get so
You
far.
have
Nice. There's shampoo in there.
Many of the people in the area are renters, and some receive housing vouchers. Almost no one has flood insurance. With many houses trashed and inundated with unsafe floodwater, some landlords have moved to nullify leases for the next year, either because the houses won't be ready or just to cut their losses.
I had just signed a new lease for a whole new year starting in August, so I was supposed to, continue to live here. We had no plans of moving whatsoever.
Bloomington's Department of Housing and Neighborhood Development has been connecting people with resources and inspecting the damage to homes.
Legally, that document or whatever agreement the tenant and the landlord have is really between them. And the legal relationship there is one that the city doesn't have oversight over, right? So that the tenant really has to look at what their legal options are.
Landlords in the area are in a tough spot too. Zella Taylor has been working with her residents, but doesn't have the same resources as many rental companies in town.
So we're accruing thousands daily. I mean, it's racking. It's racking up.
Perry Township is helping displaced residents such as Tanya Graham with hotel vouchers for a week.
Oh, good. Where's that at? Okay, awesome.
The Red Cross has begun casework to help find future housing, but Bloomington's a tough place to find a home under even normal circumstances.
So I called to a few places yesterday, but, none of them had anything available. Plus, being on Section 8, that makes it 10 times harder because instead of having 100%, of the town, you have maybe 1%.
Officials are still surveying damage around the area, but many on Bloomington's south side are feeling forgotten as they try to figure out their lives' next steps. Robinson, for her part, says she keeps reminding herself it could have been much worse.
You have to look at the glass half full. When you got barely nothing, you got to look at the glass half full. We could have lost our lives. Oh my God!
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Mitch Legan.
Well, let me know how that goes. She wants me to be her neighbor.
Kirkwood Avenue saw its worst flooding in nearly 2 decades Friday night. Pat Bean reports on the city's explanation of how it happened and why the big dig of 2000 did not fix the issue.
Before the turn of the century, the area of Kirkwood Avenue immediately west of Indiana University was prone to flooding. But in 2000, the city undertook what was to be called the Big Dig. The months-long project replaced century-old pipes under the Kirkwood and Dunn Street intersection. It alleviated the issue somewhat, but in 2008, torrential rain in early June flooded the area with a couple of feet of water. Then, last weekend, it happened again.
A lot of us are asking why this happened. And we went through a big dig years ago to prevent this from happening. it shouldn't have happened again.
City officials say much of the blame goes to Mother Nature. The city received more than 4.5 inches of rain last Friday night. That's more than the monthly average for June in the area.
That it was really an extraordinary deluge that was overwhelming basically the natural world and the built world.
Hamilton also pointed a finger at the intake culvert at 6th and Indiana, which funnels the water from Campus River into the Big Dig.
The basic problem is the river channel, if you will, is not big enough to carry a huge rain. So it rises up from 6th and Indiana and flows downhill, which it did, to cross kind of western across downtown and Kirkwood.
But the Big Dig of 2000 replaced only part of the stormwater infrastructure downtown, which further complicates the issue as newer, larger pipes converge with century-old, smaller pipes. The system eventually drains into Clear Creek. Hamilton says the original Big Dig plans called for replacing the pipe that runs from the Kirkwood area to roughly 2nd and Washington. The city resurrected the plans in 2018 and increased the stormwater fee to city residents.
So that fee increase was part of that was specifically so that we could undertake this Hidden River Pathway project and complete that design way back from when we did the first Big Dig.
The city began work on the Hidden River Pathway project earlier this year. The $13 million undertaking will replace culverts with larger box-shaped culverts sloped to move more water away from the city.
It's going to make a big difference for our downtown because we've improved upstream, we've improved downstream, and this is that connection between the two. So as much as Big Dig 2000 improved Kirkwood, having this pipe really be able to carry that water away is going to be helpful.
Homeowners along Clear Creek worry that increased flow from the city will only worsen an already bad situation. Several residences and businesses along Clear Creek were damaged by last weekend's floods.
And this creek cannot hold it. We have owned these apartments for 38 years. We flooded in 2019 and 21, and we never had that problem before, ever.
After the Hidden River Pathway project is completed, Hamilton says the city hopes to tackle the Campus River intake culvert. But the one thing the city has no control over is the climate.
Scientists tell us, and we see more of these 100-year events happening, not every 100 years, but more frequently.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Pat Bean.
We're joined now by Travis O'Brien, an assistant professor of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at IU, for more on how climate change could be leading to more severe storms. Hello, Professor O'Brien.
Hello, Perry.
Should we expect more of these unusual and damaging weather events in the future? What do the studies tell us?
The short answer is yeah, we should bank on more of these. From a fundamental atmospheric science point of view, warming adds more moisture to the atmosphere, and all else being equal, more moisture in the atmosphere, when that's lifted, that means more rain, and that's increasing exponentially. There's about 7% more water in the atmosphere for every degree of warming that we go through. We've observed increases in the frequency of extreme events over the last 100 years or so across the United States and in the Midwest. And climate model simulations, which are models that simulate sequences of weather and take into consideration increases in greenhouse gases, they suggest that we should see increases in the frequency of these beyond what we're seeing now. So should we expect a 100-year storm to happen again in 100 years? No, we should. First off, it's just random. This is just statistics and chance. And also, it's the frequency of these storms is increasing. It's not uncommon to see 100-year storms becoming 50.
Now, I understand you did some specific research on this particular rainfall. What did you find?
So this particular event put out about 6 inches over about an 8-hour period. If we look back at the record of observations that we have available here in Indiana, which includes daily rainfall, we look at 2-day rainfall totals and look at that from 1895 to present. This was the 3rd largest event on record in Bloomington, Indiana, and it's the largest that's happened in the last 100 years.
All of us have heard individuals we know say, my individual actions won't have an impact on climate change. What's your response to that?
Well, so first off, I've got to give a disclaimer here. This is getting into my opinion, and this is just mine and not those of Indiana University or my sponsors in the Department of Energy or Department of Defense. I think implied in that question, when people ask that, I think a lot of times people are asking, if we deal with climate change, is that going to reduce my quality of life? And there's a report that came out a few years ago called Pathways to Deep Decarbonization that lays out a way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions down to levels that'll reduce greenhouse gas changes. Efficiency is one of those things. So, turning off lights, using less energy, that's part of it, but that's not all. We need to decarbonize energy sources. So using more wind energy, solar energy. We need to use less carbon dioxide intensive fuels like fossil fuels, move more to biofuels. All of these things require large government investment of the level that we just did with COVID. So it's possible, it's expensive, and it requires public support. So that's, if an individual is going to make an impact, I think the real impact there is pushing on corporations, pushing on our Congress people who represent us to actually enact policies that can go in the direction they'll reduce.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Brien.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk, Plexes have been approved for certain core neighborhoods in Bloomington. Ahead, how some had issues with the process. And the 4th Street Festival of the Arts and Crafts is returning this Labor Day weekend after last year's event was canceled due to COVID. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Wake up.
Wake up to the world.
To the marvels. The mayhem.
The music.
Wake up to the wows. The woes.
The wonder.
Wake up to the commotion. To the beauty.
To the humanity.
To the hope. Wake up every morning. Fully awake.
NPR Morning Edition.
Tune in to your local station or download the NPR app.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana's current legislative maps are more skewed toward one party, in this case Republicans, than 95% of all legislative maps in the country over the last 50 years. Brandon Smith reports that that's according to a new study commissioned by the group Women for Change Indiana.
Hoosier Republicans typically get between 54 and 59% of the vote in statewide races. George Washington University professor Christopher Warshaw says that should mean that Republicans hold legislative majorities of around 60%.
But instead, the Republicans have 78% of the seats in Congress and almost 80% of the seats in the state Senate.
Indiana has undergone a political shift over the last decade, but Warshaw says those sorts of transitions typically take time when it comes to legislative seats.
But we saw in Indiana was not a long, gradual shift. It was exactly when the new map went into place in 2012 that the level of bias in favor of Republicans, really shifted.
Women for Change Indiana Executive Director Rima Shahid says that should matter to every Hoosier.
No matter what issue you care about, the first step to making change in the state of Indiana is by having fair maps.
Indiana lawmakers will draw new legislative maps later this year, and Shahid says Hoosiers are asking for that process to be open, fair, and competitive. But she says that's not what she expects.
Then they're going to not get better, in my opinion. They might get worse. How much worse can we get?
Indiana Republicans have repeatedly rejected efforts at redistricting reform over the last few years. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
The Bloomington City Council passed an amendment to the UDO last month that will allow plexes in single-family zoned neighborhoods with restrictions. After going to many meetings, one resident asked city limits what more the city could do in the future to improve the public input process. Bente Bouthier reports.
Kathy Crabtree has lived in Bloomington for more than 30 years. She's a member of local groups that push for policy that promotes affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing. She closely followed the Plex Amendment public input sessions held by the Planning and Transportation Department before the amendment was sent to City Council for vote.
The original plan that the city put out was pretty
progressive and had a lot of duplexes in it, and it had a lot more zones that were R4. And then there was a lot of backlash.
Crabtree says most of the public comment at these virtual meetings came from homeowners who are part of neighborhood associations. But Bloomington's housing is made up of more than 60% renters, and she didn't feel that was reflected at the meetings. Scott Robinson is with the Bloomington Planning and Transportation Department. He says when the city initiates an update to zoning code, state law requires sending written notice to landowners.
And we don't do that for any other project in the city, so that's one thing that's very unique. We've done that 3 times now with this update process to the UDO. Is every property owner in the city received a notice.
Jackie Scanlon works with Robinson in the planning department. She says the Plex amendment was meant to help provide better housing options for low-income residents and renters, so she admits the city should have done more outreach to these groups.
I don't think we did a very good job of targeting that population. I think that's a fair point. Of most of the people who got direct contact from us were probably homeowners, because we have to send notice to people who own property.
Robinson says their departments talked about how to better reach all residents on the housing spectrum, and it's a matter of overcoming a variety of barriers, ranging from internet access to time availability to work schedules. On June 13th, she and other members of Neighbors United organized a call-out for local renters, with plans to start a Bloomington Renters Association.
We've got other initiatives too, but the one that we're currently working on is getting better representation of tenants and renters in the discussions that are going on in the community, so that they have a voice. We were able during the UDO to get in touch with some renters, but we didn't specifically reach out as far as organizing them.
Around 20 people gathered at Butler Park to talk about how they'd like housing availability, especially for renters, to change. Crabtree hopes some of the renters who came to the call-out meeting will take on leadership roles in shaping the Bloomington Renters Association, since most of the Monroe County Neighbors United organizers are homeowners. One renter who attended the meeting was Vox Booker.
I think we saw a disproportionate amount of homeowners, one simply because they had the time and resources to make themselves available for local meetings, and because they had the neighborhood association that could inform them.
Another meeting participant, Andrew Gunther, has been renting in Bloomington since 2015. He says Bloomington does a good job at creating space for people to participate in discussion, but falls short in involving underrepresented groups.
So next time there is a discussion on the housing policy, at the very beginning of that policy, we should be included in that process.
Both Booker and Gunther say now that the Renters Association has started to organize, they expect the city to recognize it and treat it equally to other neighborhood associations. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ben Taboutier.
The 4th Street Festival of the Arts and Crafts is set to return this Labor Day weekend. Holden Abshire reports.
Don Adams says art is a circular process. Artists create a piece, someone sees it, and then the artist lets it go. But with art shows canceled during COVID-19, the process was incomplete. Artists had little time to interact with patrons and more time to experiment with new ideas.
But you know what? I would appreciate going to an art fair again and getting feedback, because that's one thing that art fairs are really wonderful for. You get to sit there and talk to people about your work.
Luckily for artists such as Adams, in-person fairs are returning, including the 4th Street Festival of Arts and Crafts in Bloomington this Labor Day weekend. The festival is downsizing from 125 to 80 artists in order to provide at least 10 feet between each booth. Spoken word and music stages will be virtual.
You might see totally different bodies of work, and because it's been a shakeup in terms of who applies, it'll be a really different looking show. So for the patron who comes, it'll be interesting.
Adam says a lot of older artists retired during the pandemic, but others took time to experiment and expand their craft, like potter Rebecca Lowry. Lowry is vice president of the 4th Street Festival and works out of her home studio. She began doing wholesale orders during the pandemic in order to provide a second income. Lowry uses old designs for wholesale, but says she still had time to expand her style.
My new work is a lot more textures and a lot more
painting on it with a lot more colors and is a little bit darker, which may be a reflection of the pandemic. I don't know.
Lowry experimented for 18 months, but that doesn't mean that she has 18 months worth of work to sell. She spends most of her time fulfilling wholesale orders. As a result, she says she's going to have to be more particular about the shows she attends.
I prefer going to towns where people like my work, and I know that I'm going to get a good response and be able to interact with an art-friendly community, which Bloomington has always been.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Holden Apsher.
Our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Good night.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.